Wonderful. Welcome to everybody and good afternoon. I'm Mary Hunt at the Water Office, and my colleague Diane New is here as well, the other co-director. We're not always in the same place at the same time, but always glad when we are. And we are delighted to have you with us, and we're particularly delighted to have Melanie Morrison with us today. Not her maiden voyage, as it were, at Water, but a longtime colleague in this work and someone we're delighted to have back with a new book, Becoming Trustworthy White Allies. And I will recommend it many times during the hour. This is a Duke University Press book, which Melanie published in the last year or so. And it really is, I think, a very important book for us to look at and to take seriously and to learn from. So with that, again, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are in the world. Welcome to Water. We're in Silver Spring, Maryland, and we are welcoming in a warm way our friend and colleague, the Reverend Dr. Melanie Morrison, whom I will introduce shortly. We at Water always begin our programs with the land acknowledgement, and this Water Talk on January the 14th, 2026 is no exception. We incorporate a land acknowledgement into our programs to remind ourselves of why we do what we do and what we need to do more of given the systemic injustice Indigenous and other people of color face in this country. A land acknowledgement is not the end of things. It's a beginning, a time to reflect on our history and to commit to justice making. Water is on Indigenous land in Silver Spring, Maryland, that is the traditional and contemporary home of the Piscataway and Anacostan peoples. We acknowledge the trauma and injustice toward Indigenous people and other people of color that is deep in U.S. culture and history. We join in efforts to eradicate it and to make reparations for the genocide involved. Water's work, whether intellectual, spiritual, or liturgical, is aimed to bring about social justice. So I invite you to join me for a moment of collective silence to bring to mind the Native people on whose land we sit, and feel free to put their names in the chat if you so wish. Let us take a moment to acknowledge their presence. As long as we're acknowledging the problem areas of our culture, I invite us to take a moment to reflect on some recent travesties wrought by the Trump administration, namely the incursion into Venezuela and the murder by an ICE agent of Renee Nicole Good, and the shooting of two immigrants in Portland. These horrific crimes affect all of us in their brutality and their might makes right approach to human community. I'm never one to rely on the Bible for anything but a doorstop at this point, but I am going to quote 1 Corinthians 16:22, let them be considered anathema. Water's work brings feminist, womanist, spiritual values and intellectual work to efforts for social change. Our hope is that by socializing the resources of feminist, womanist work in religion, we spread tools and energy for justice. In light of these recent actions and the many more against immigrants, people of color, queer people, those who are poor, pregnant persons, and so many others, it's more crucial than ever that we create opportunities like this for learning, conversation, and resistance. I want to assure you that Water plans to protect these spaces and to expand them in the months ahead, come what may. Feel free to join us, and please feel free to suggest speakers, topics, and books that we might fruitfully explore. The stakes are rising. The time is now. Thank you. I'm going to introduce with delight our speaker, Melanie Morrison, and her book, Becoming Trustworthy White Allies. And then she's going to explore with us for about 25 minutes the major concepts of the book, the major themes, and then we'll open the floor for questions and answers and discussion until about 2 o'clock Eastern Time, when we will close officially. The Zoom will remain open for conversation and questions and information sharing, but we will close at the top of the hour as per our covenant to simply work together for 1 hour and respect your schedules and ours. I invite you to listen and to enjoy. We are recording this and we will take notes that will be on our website shortly, along with the video of this session. You can re-listen by going to Water's website at www.waterwomensalliance.org. Look under programs and teleconferences with today's date and Melanie's name, and you can rewatch or share this with others. And we encourage you to do that. We encourage you to use this as a resource with your friends and colleagues and communities. Feel free to use this. Melanie can't be everywhere all the time. She can be here today, and we can socialize this opportunity with others. And I'm just delighted that that's something that we as Water can do as a service to the community. We'll also send you notes and the link to this video. So please, please use it in a class, use it in an adult study group, and begin to think about how you might become more of a trustworthy white ally for those who are white and for those who are with us who are not white, to understand that there is this work that is being done that is so, I think, significant, so necessary, and now so urgent. I want to welcome you, Melanie. Melanie describes herself as an author, a speaker, and an anti-racism educator. I believe we will experience all of that shortly. The author, the speaker, and the anti-racism educator. She lives in Durham, North Carolina. I'm happy to see her partner, April, is with us. She's an ordained minister in the United Church of Christ. She studied for the MDiv at Yale University's Divinity School, and she earned a doctorate at the University of Groningen in the Netherlands. Melanie Morrison is one of the innovators of my theological generation. It's interesting, Melanie, how many of us, you and Jeanette Stokes at the Center for Women in Ministry in the South, and Marie Fortune, formerly of the Faith Trust Institute, and Carol Adams, another one of your Yale Divinity School cohort, who's a prolific writer, and myself here at Water with Diane, and others we could name, use our theological training to create new spaces in which to do what the Reverend Dr. Katie Cannon of blessed memory called to do the work our souls must have. It's no accident that I mention white women's names, as we were in our early years and largely still are among the few whose privilege, whose white privilege, whose economic privilege, whose educational privilege permits us to figure out how to make a living doing like what we feel needs to be done and what continues to be so important to us. It's a function of our own privilege. The task, as I see it, is to create a world in which everyone can fulfill their vocation in that way. That's what Katie Cannon meant. She didn't mean it just for those of us who can find a way, but she meant it for everyone. Some Water people will recall Melanie's last time with us when she discussed her book, Letters from Old Screamer Mountain, in April 2022. And some of us who've been here for a very long time will also recall a brilliant article that we discussed in this space in May of 2012. I think I was 16 that year, but anyway. The article was called What No Longer Serves Us, Resisting Ableism and Anti-Judaism in New Testament Healing Narratives. I'm going to repeat the title because it might ring a bell for people. What No Longer Serves Us, Resisting Ableism and Anti-Judaism in New Testament Healing Narratives. It was written by Melanie Morrison and Julia Watts-Belser, published in the Journal of Feminist Studies in Religion. And we're back to now May 2012. I dare say some of that material was a foretaste of Julia Watts-Belser's prize-winning book, Loving Our Own Bones, Disability Wisdom, and the Spiritual Subversiveness of Knowing Ourselves Whole, which was published in 2023. And many of you will remember that we were among the first that had Julia Watts-Belser talking about that book, which has recently won the Grawemeyer Prize for Works in Religion. It's also, Melanie, quite clear that your work follows from some of the themes that were raised in that conversation in 2012. And it's certainly the case that Darla Shum, who did our last Water Talk in December, picked up on the New Testament healing narratives. So much of what Julia did is from Hebrew scripture, but Darla is asking these questions and saying absolutely no. In fact, she said so many times that Jesus never met a person with a disability that Jesus didn't want to heal. And, that wasn't particularly helpful, she says. And some of you remember that. That was just last month. And you can go back to her. Again, you can go to the Water website and find the link to the talk by Darla Shum and read that theme. So we've come full circle here in a very important way. Or better, we're spiraling onto something new. because today we look at Melanie's newest book, Becoming Trustworthy White Allies. This is a book set in our contemporary racist imperialist culture, in which she draws on her work with the project Doing Our Own Work, which she founded in 1994. She describes it as an intensive anti-racism program for white people who seek to deepen their commitment to confronting racism and white privilege. She and her mother, Melanie Morrison of blessed memory, founded the Levin Center in Michigan to provide a space for this kind of education and respite for those working on social justice issues. Melanie, this is a challenging volume. By parts, one woman's story, yours, a critical analysis of contemporary patriarchy, all of ours, and most relevant, a practical how-to book on moving from being clueless, afraid, resistant to dealing with white racism, both personally and politically, to imagining oneself moving in the direction, probably never getting there, but becoming a trustworthy ally. It's not an easy work, and most of us, I think, will make limited progress at best in our lives, but it's crucial work for the future that we want and we need, and I thank you before you say a word. I thank you for it. I'll leave the rest to you to sketch out. I welcome you, Melanie, with the certain knowledge that we will learn from and with you, and that your work makes a world of difference, and I hope it makes a different world. Melanie, welcome. Be at home.
Thank you so much, Mary, and thank you for recalling that circle, that wonderful conversation with Julia Watts-Belzer. Yes, good afternoon. And thank you, Mary and Diane, for inviting me to this WATERtalk and for all the critically important life-giving programs that Water has offered for decades. And that work goes on, thankfully. And I'm delighted and grateful to all of you who are present this afternoon. Your presence is a gift, and I thank you for being here. Becoming Trustworthy White Allies is a collection of essays, lectures, stories, and personal reflection about the work white people must undertake to become trustworthy partners in the work of racial justice. In pulling the pieces of this book together, I had two primary groups of readers in mind. I'm writing for white people who are deeply troubled by the corrosive persistence of systemic racism and white supremacy, and who long to develop the capacity and resiliency to keep showing up and being anti-racist agents of change where they live, work, study, worship, and volunteer. I am also writing for white people who seek to move through places where we as white people too often get stuck, and I'll say something about those in a moment, so that we can step up with humility, and let me say cultural humility, courage, and consistency to participate in movements led by Black, Indigenous, Latine, and other people of color, and help move other white people to greater anti-racist awareness and action. I want to say something about the title of this book. Choosing a good title is hard work, and therefore I want to say what I mean by the different words in the title. First, neither trustworthy nor ally are words that those of us who are white can simply claim for ourselves as identities. We can strive to be trustworthy. We can strive to be allies or accomplices, co-conspirators. But it is Black, Indigenous, Latine, and other people of color who determine who their anti-racist allies and accomplices are, and when trust has been earned. I really wish the word ally could be regarded more as a verb than a noun, because the way I mean it, it represents the commitment to take action, not just to learn about racism, but to show up, take action, and be in right relationship. And learning what it means to be a trustworthy anti-racist ally, in my experience, is a lifelong journey, rife with risks, mistakes, growth, healing, new community, and joy. Many of the pieces in this book are story-based, real life story-based, and some are autobiographical. I share the mistakes I have made, the wisdom that colleagues and mentors have shared with me, the repair I have sought to enact, and the strength and hope I have found working with others to nurture anti-racist communities of love, support, and accountability. If you ever hold this book in your hands, and of course I hope you will, and you turn to the table of contents, your eye may fall on the title of an essay in the middle of the book or at the very end of the book that intrigues you. Feel free to start there. You don't have to read what comes before to be able to dig into that particular piece. This book is a collage of writings and reflections that I have gathered into 4 topical sections. The first being inner work. The second section, ancestral investigations. The third section, legacies of lynching. And the fourth and final section, staying power. And what I'd like to do is give you a glimpse into the subjects I tackled and wrestled with in these 4 sections. Now, there are several essays or lectures or stories in each of the sections. I'm not going to go into all of them, but I'm going to just highlight one from each. So from the inner work section, I want to read an excerpt from the very first essay, which bears the same title of the book, Becoming Trustworthy White Allies. In the early 1990s, an African-American friend and clergy colleague, the Reverend Lynette Stallworth, challenged me to critically examine why, if she was in the room, I, as a white woman, so often looked to her if something racist occurred, depending on her to call me out or others out or advise me when racist words, behaviors, policies were at play. Lynette asked, Melanie, what happens when I'm not in the room? How are you, as a white person, holding other white people accountable? How are other white people doing that for you? Racism is a white problem, Melanie, and it is long past time for you all to do your own work. I was stunned and convicted by Lynette's challenge. I had to acknowledge that I and many of my well-intentioned white friends did not have vocabulary to talk about racism in an everyday kind of way. We were frequently mired in feelings of guilt. When we encountered racism, we could not be counted on to speak up and confront it. Too often, we fell mute, became confused, reacted with defensiveness, or simply wanted to disappear. I could see I was not trustworthy, especially when things got hot. To understand what it means to be white in America and break the silences that surround it in white communities, I believe requires arduous, persistent, and soul-stretching work. Sadly, too many of us stop short of that deep work. We assume that our good intentions and eagerness to help are enough. We come into multiracial gatherings or organizations expecting to be liked and trusted, but trust isn't something we're granted simply because we finally showed up. Trust must be earned again and again. Or better said, we need to become trustworthy white allies, people passionately committed to eliminating this system of oppression that unjustly benefits us. That's the end of that excerpt, but the story continues. 2 years after Lynette Stallworth issued that challenge, and I will say after she issued it, I know I and my colleague and mother at that time, my mother, still my mother, she's not no longer physically on this earth, but my colleague and mother, Melanie Morrison, and I, we attended every anti-racism workshop we could register for, read voraciously, and we decided to found an anti-racism seminar for white people, and we called it Doing Our Own Work. We launched this seminar in 1994 in Eleanor Morrison's living room. We were serving as co-directors of Levin, as Mary mentioned, a nonprofit organization based in Michigan dedicated to nurturing the relationship between spirituality and social justice. The decision to launch Doing Our Own Work arose from additional conversations with colleagues of color, additional to Lynette's, who challenged us to develop a rigorous anti-racism seminar that could interrupt the repetitious and hurtful behaviors white people often exhibit in racially diverse spaces, such as denial, defensiveness, tearful shame, or a white savior mentality. It was their experience, these colleagues of color, that white people's growth in consciousness too often thereby occurred at the expense of people of color in those multiracial settings. Doing Our Own Work was designed as a supplement to, not a substitute for, context in which people of different races strategize together how racism must be confronted and dismantled. Nothing can take the place of those face-to-face contacts, dialogues, and collaborations between people of different races, but too often, those of us who are white come into those racially diverse spaces carrying unexamined privilege and emotional baggage that gets projected onto people of color in ways that disrupt, sidetrack, and undermine the collaborative work that needs to be accomplished. So in designing an intensive learning community for white people, Eleanor Morrison and I sought the advice, counsel, wisdom, and warnings from colleagues of color who recognize both the need for a seminar like Doing Our Own Work and the dangers inherent in all white spaces. We designed Doing Our Own Work as a highly interactive seminar. We limited enrollment to 20 participants to ensure in-depth reflection, dialogue, and community building. And we decided the seminar should be 6 full days. 6 full days, meeting 2 consecutive days once a month for 3 months. And throughout the seminar, we emphasized that white people cannot become effective anti-racist allies unless we are in ongoing, accountable relationships with people of color. Excuse me. We spoke often about the hazards of acting unilaterally, warning participants that developing strategies and agendas without being in dialogue with and relationship with people of color could do more harm than good. And we encouraged participants to become engaged in grassroots anti-racist organizations in their communities led by Black, Indigenous, Latine, or other people of color. Well, I had the privilege of co-facilitating doing our own work for 26 years with a fabulous network of facilitators. First, Eleanor Morrison, and then we became 12 facilitators, and more than 750 people took part over 26 years. That seminar continues under the leadership of Justice Leaders Collaborative now. And in the first section of my book, there is an essay about what we learned in those 26 years and doing our own work and how we were changed. And it's entitled Why an Anti-Racism Seminar for White People. So let me tell you about the ancestral investigations section. 6 years ago, I decided to step back from 30 years of work as a facilitator of social justice workshops and seminars to make ancestral research and writing a full-time priority. The yearning to investigate my ethnic and cultural origins was awakened by the ancestral questions we explored in doing our own work, and then further intensified when my Aunt Harriet, my father's only sibling, shared a startling revelation with me in 2008, 2 years after my father's death, and just months before I launched Allies for Change. I was visiting Aunt Harriet when she informed me that I am a direct descendant of enslaving ancestors who lived in Montevallo, Alabama, a small town 35 miles south of Birmingham, Alabama. She also mentioned that the former plantation home of those ancestors, now known as King House, is centrally located on the University of Montevallo campus. And according to local legends, it is a haunted house. Just shy of my 70th birthday, I decided to embark on a journey into ever deeper involvement with people in Montevallo, both living and dead, constantly asking myself, what does this reckoning with my ancestral past require of me? I knew it was not going to be enough just to research and find out. What does it require of me? So the second section of this book, Ancestral Investigations, contains essays I've written about this ancestral journey, lectures I've given at the University of Montevallo, and a letter to my great-great-great-grandmother, Elizabeth King Shortridge, one of my enslaving ancestors. During these past 6 years, I have made numerous trips to Montevallo, to walk the land, to spend time in King House, to work in the Shelby County Archives, to meet with local historians, to speak on campus, to work collaboratively with students, faculty, and staff at the university, and with local residents involved in a grassroots organization called the Montevallo Legacy Project, all of whom are passionate about unearthing suppressed histories in that town. And I've hoped that my contribution as a King descendant could be a small act of repair and a contribution to the larger collaborative project of forging deeper, truer narratives about King House and the enslaved people whose lives and labor have yet to be fully and justly remembered. Working in partnership with people in the very town where my ancestors had been enslavers, and where the former plantation home still stands, deepened my awareness of how the work of retrieving neglected and suppressed histories can be acts of repair with rippling impact when shared in classrooms, articles, community-wide lectures, and deep, deep work and dialogue together. It has been an enormous privilege to work collaboratively with the Montevallo Legacy Project and the University of Montevallo's Peace and Justice Studies program as they mentor students who are seeking to give voice to untold stories in the history of King House and the land on which they study. This experience has reaffirmed my belief that despite well-funded extorting efforts right now to restrict the teaching of slavery and systemic racism, there is a deep yearning in this nation for truth telling. I heard that yearning expressed, and I continue to hear it, expressed repeatedly by University of Montevallo students, and I am profoundly heartened by the courage, creativity, and humility of those students, what they are bringing to the work of reparative remembrance on their Alabama campus. During this 6-year journey of investigation and writing, I've been deliberate about sharing anything that I unearth about my ancestors with the people of Montevallo, and I've also sought to share those discoveries with descendants of the people, my people, enslaved. And though some of those descendants, in turn, have generously shared oral and written family histories, photographs, stories about their ancestors with me. So these are some of the things you'll find in the second section of the book. Legacies of Lynching is the third section of my book, and I want to call your attention today to one of the essays in that section called Soul Splitting. Soul splitting. It's the term I use to describe how the intergenerational legacies of white supremacy, I believe, have infected, distorted, and weakened the emotional and spiritual lives of white Americans. In my ancestral investigations and in my study of lynching, I have been haunted by the fact that the auction block and lynching tree were sites of massive white spectatorship. As I'm sure you know, lynching was a systemic form of torture and terror perpetrated by white people against Black men and women for decades in this country. Lynchings were rarely isolated and random events shrouded in secrecy. And word of the impending violence spread through white communities, and in the aftermath, photographs, postcards, relics, and newspaper reports purposely guaranteed that every member of the community would be given the opportunity to be a spectator, and rarely did white people intervene to help quell the escalating frenzy. Lynchings could draw hundreds, even thousands of white spectators who gathered to cheer and encourage the instigators of mob violence, and they often brought their children and hoisted them on their shoulders. Well, something similar occurred for hundreds of years before lynching at the auction block. And when white children at the auction block or lynching tree beheld the horror of this violence, they had to dissociate and disavow what they were feeling, because as they looked around, they saw their elders frolicking in this violence. There was the deacon of the church. There was the grandfather of a friend. Oh, there was one of their teachers. As James Allen, author of Without Sanctuary, has said, lynching, and I believe it's also true of the auction block, was a form of indoctrination for white children, the place where they were taught to look but not see, look but not fully apprehend what they were seeing. And that became a means of domesticating terror, normalizing it, and producing a numbing effect that allows its perpetuation. I'm calling our attention to this essay today because for the past year, we have experienced the purposeful staging of violent scenes and acts by this administration. Staging by Kristi Noem on her website that caters to white spectatorship as armed masked men kick down doors, tackle farm workers, beat them if they resist, handcuff them, kidnap them, send them to terrorizing prisons like CCOT in El Salvador. We see the staging of Kristi Noem sporting a Rolex watch and smiling in front of emaciated prisoners in CCOT. We see the president and Governor Ron DeSantis laughing and shaking hands as they inspect alligator Alcatraz. Now, thankfully, there are allies, and allies in this case aren't only white, but there are allies to immigrant people in our country. There are allies in many towns and cities across the country who are breaking with spectatorship, attending ICE Watch trainings, taking to the streets protesting, filming the kidnapping as documentation, responding to the priorities and strategies developed by immigrant-led organizations. I know in North Carolina, where I live, Siembra, North Carolina, is such an immigrant-led organization, demanding that local officials pledge non-cooperation with ICE and doing everything in their power to protect the rights of their immigrant neighbors, co-workers, and friends. The final section of this book is staying power. And one of the reasons I was compelled to put these pieces of this book together is because it has happened far too often that those of us who are white are jolted awake through an horrific event like the suffocating murder of George Floyd in 2020. We feel deep indignation. We become engaged for a time and then check out again, fall back into familiar, safer routines, and retreat from the long haul work of justice making. One of the last essays in the book is titled, "What Will It Take for White People to Stay the Course?" Given this tendency for those of us who are white to become engaged for a while in the work of racial justice, but then check out again, I felt it was incumbent for us to wrestle deeply with these questions. What will it take for those of us who are white to understand that the work of racial justice is a marathon, not a sprint, an intergenerational marathon? How will we develop the consciousness, commitment, and resiliency to stay the course and not check out? How will we develop the capacity as well as commitment to become what Reverend Dr. Ruby Sales calls long distance runners for racial justice? If those of us who are white want to become trustworthy partners in the work of racial justice, we will need to develop vigilance, the courage, strength, and resiliency to stay the course. In the essay, What Will It Take for White People to Stay the Course, I offer 10 guideposts or anchoring practices that I believe are necessary if we are to stay the course. And in closing, I'd like to share an excerpt from the last anchoring practice: stay on the journey. I believe it's possible to become trustworthy white allies if we are willing to move out of our comfort zones, risk having our assumptions challenged, our lives disrupted, and our view and our way of viewing the world transformed. Most important is the commitment to stay on the journey, unlearning and interrupting the habits, practices, and policies that keep racism and white privilege intact is lifelong work, never done once and for all. Wherever we are on this journey, whether we've been engaged in anti-racism activism for years or we're just waking up and wanting to dive deeper, it is never too late for us to bring our hearts, minds, bodies, and resources to the work of interrupting and dismantling racism and white supremacy. It is never too late to develop new muscles and become agents of change in our spheres of influence. It's never too late to do deep, strenuous, and soul-stretching work so that we can step up with courage, consistency, and cultural humility to participate in people of color-led movements. It's never too late to nurture relationships and communities of support and accountability so that we can develop the emotional, physical, and spiritual strength needed to stay the course and become long distance runners for racial justice. Thank you for letting me share some of this book with you. And I'd like to hear from you whatever you'd like to say, what by way of response or your own experience, or perhaps you have a question for me. Thank you.
Thank you, Melanie Morrison. I know I speak for all of us in thanking you for not only this book, but for your moral courage in facing what we all need to face, namely our complicity in and our potential to change racist, classist paradigms of postmodern life in the West. And this is an enormous task, and you model for us how it's done, but more importantly, you, I think, provide us with the tools to do it. And so anybody who reads your book or who hears you speak can never say that they didn't know.
Thank you, Mary.
Becoming Trustworthy White Allies is the book. It is a Duke University Press publication, 2025. I highly, highly recommend it. And I suggest that people take it and digest it and begin to incorporate some of the ideas, but also to think seriously about longer term processes that will make this happen. Because I think just as Melanie has made so clear, this is a lifelong process, and I appreciate your ending with the words of Ruby Sales. Thank you so much. The forum is now open for conversation. We turn to questions and discussion. Please limit yourself as much as you can so we can hear from as many people as time allows. Use the raise hands button down at the bottom of your screen under the react symbol and raise your hand. As I have just done, it will bring you to the top of the queue. I will call on people, and then, of course, lower your hand when you're finished. If you find that cumbersome or can't find it or would prefer to do it another way, there's always this old way we learned as children to just wave our hand in the air. And you'll remember, those who went to Catholic school, that we would beat our chests and say, stir, stir, stir. And stir meant sister. That I had the answer. So you can also use that approach if that makes you more comfortable in making your question known. So the floor is open. Melanie, thank you again, and we are in your debt. The floor is open. Please go ahead. I'm going to start with Barb Smalley. Go ahead, Barb. And as you unmute yourself and just say your name, maybe a word about yourself, and then we'll go to Toby Hoffman. Go ahead.
Okay, I got it. So Melanie, when you were talking, among many things that you said that struck me, was when you said suppressed histories. And in my experience, I have found just trying to, I had a similar experience where I learned very late in my grandmother's life. I said, who is that picture of up at the top of the stairs? And she said, well, that's your great great grandfather. And I said, well, what happened to him? Well, he died at Gettysburg. And we're Southerners. And I had no idea. And she was probably in her mid 90s by that time. And I just thought, how is it that I knew family was always so important to her. And how is it that could have been something that hadn't really gotten through to me until my late 20s. And it's led me to do a lot of the investigation. But what I wanted to say is that just that idea of suppressed history. So even when I don't have the courage to put myself out there, just doing that research, and using my good sense to try to imagine my ancestors who didn't live that long ago. My great grandfather was born before the Civil War began. When his father died, he was about 5 years old, my great grandfather. And so as I take that in and try to understand, as Southerners, what were their circumstances? How were they thinking? How did they understand the relationships with the enslaved people who lived on the same property in Southern Virginia? But just those little details really have, those little pursuits have kept me on this path.
Yeah. Barb, thank you. Thank you for bringing suppressed into our familial contexts. Our intergenerational suppression of stories that perhaps were considered, we don't need, that's the past is the past, whatever. But there's purposeful suppression, there is forgetfulness, but here we are now in this eye of the storm, in this national crisis, where with extortion, withholding funds, there is pressure on universities, on colleges, on K through 12 curricula and so forth to purposely suppress this and to reinstitute lost cause narratives about our nation's history in this 250th year. God help us. What we're going to hear from on high about our nation's history and what is going to be punished. So I just want to thank you, Barb, for raising how that happens within families, because I believe that all of us, whether we have children, I know I have a grandchild. I have a stepdaughter, Tanya, a daughter. I have 6 nephews and a niece. I'm just saying that, and grandnieces and nephews, there is a responsibility we have now to keep alive this history with the young people in our lives and for ourselves to keep the truthful narratives alive. And I know there are people working in archives and so forth to try to keep to protect, the dangers right now that we're facing with what scrubbing websites, trying to, scrub out this history. I know it's not going to be forgotten by those who have kept it alive, and we can do that. But let's remember, if we take our kids to national parks or our grandkids or whatever, educate ourselves before we go there, because it may not be on the signs or the website anymore about what truthfully happened. There's just like one sphere of influence where we can take action to change what is being done right now. Thank you, Barb.
Thank you, Barb. Thanks, Melanie. Toby Hoffman, you'll be next.
Thank you, Melanie. One thing I wanted to just I highlighted when I wrote down was that the witnessing that is going on at the ICE kidnappings actions,
Yeah.
it kind of turns the tables on the spectator position.
Yes,
I
yes.
kind of appreciated that thought about we're now turning we are witnessing the perpetrators, not the people being, well, we are hoping to document the people who are being kidnapped, but the focus is on them. But
Yes.
I wanted to change the topic because not change the topic. I wanted to, I was realizing that I'm white, but I also am Jewish and middle class, and I've done work on all three of those. But I'm wondering, there was a question for you, like, have you done work on with groups or encountered that with other in your groups, in your trainings, particularly right now as a Jewish person. Many of you maybe saw the burning of the synagogue in Mississippi and
Yes.
in Jackson. So that anti-Semitism also has become a sense of heightened alert, or under heightened alert. But anyway, so that was a question for you, mostly
Yes.
to see if there's
Okay.
something that you have
Yes,
worked
thank you.
with.
Um, I know in our Allies for Change work, um, we were doing intersectional justice work. Sometimes, depending if the invitation was to put together a team from an organization was asking us to do disability justice work. We we kept the focus on ableism and disability justice, but we also said we can't do justice to ableism if we're not also talking about racism and anti-Semitism. And, so I think we kept, when we did racial justice work, we kept the focus so that we wouldn't be sidelined, but said we must also do this work intersectionally. And that's true also for those of us who are white, exploring our cultural, religious, ethnic roots. We don't all have the same story. Uh, Sometimes, like for some of us, as James Baldwin said, the price of the ticket to becoming white was another suppressed story. I mean, when I began my ancestral investigation, I had no clue where my people came from, when they landed on these shores, from whence they hailed, past my grandparents. And that was my white ancestral work. Yours Toby is different, huh? As a Jewish white person. So this work must be intersectional if we're going to really get to the heart of it all. I'm not. I hope I've responded to your
Thank
question.
you very much. No, that I like the
Yeah,
close.
thanks, Toby, for the question. I'm going to look into the chat for a moment and say that there's a very important comment by Tracy West, who says, "Thank you so much, Melanie, for this wonderful work. Such an important point about the staging.
Mm,
Also, sometimes the prisoners that Noam poses with are stripped down to their underwear, adding to the sexual humiliation, which is yet another form of this kind of intersectional analysis. And I think that goes along with Toby's question.
mhm.
And I thank Tracy West for that observation.
Thank you, Tracy. Yes.
Tracy West, professor emerita now at Drew University Divinity School, recently retired. Paula, I'm going to turn to you for your comment, and then I'm going to make the announcements and close us out at the top of the hour, and then we'll start just after the top of the hour with Sid with your comment as well. So go ahead, Paul, and others as you wish. Melanie, do you have a few minutes to stay with us just to
I do.
I think there's more conversation to be had here, and we won't finish everything, but I think we need some more. Paula,
Uh,
first. Yep.
yeah, I would like to thank you, Melanie, for writing this because it's at a very good time for us. I'm a member of the Roman Catholic Women Priests movement, and the majority of us are white, very much big majority are white, but certainly working for justice in the church. And we have just begun, really, we've been working on it, but just begun to bring to the whole group um, our part in being these white allies. And so this is, I now I can recommend this book to the whole group because it's what we will be putting our focus on and working on to see where that part of justice in the church can be our mission. So thank you so much for this. This is very good timing. I'm so glad I'm here.
Thank you, Paula, and I wish you strength and resolve in the work you're doing.
Thank you.
Thank you, Paula. Yes, Paula's recently named a bishop in that movement, and
Mm.
there's tremendous work being done by a lot of Roman Catholic women. In fact, in May, there'll be the 50th anniversary of the non-ordination of Roman Catholic women celebrated in a conference in May. Our successful 5 decades of avoiding being co-opted by patriarchy and other such things. But one of the key things there will be to celebrate the variety of ways in which people have gone into ministry, yours being one of them. Let me bring us to a close officially, just so that people who have to leave against their better judgment will be able to do that gracefully. And then we will continue with Sid asking the next question. And I actually have a question too. And it's another biblical question. It's another biblical reference I want to make, isn't it? This is I'm 2 for 2 today. Thank you, Melanie, for a truly instructive hour, for your relentless efforts to bring about justice, and all our good wishes and our gratitude go to you for this book and for the work that it represents. And also, our good wishes go with you for what you say in other settings is your next project. And I want to simply mention that without any detail, but simply to say that you have another project not unlike this on the hopper, looking at the situation of Native people and what you see as priority issues um, with Native people as well as with Black people of African descent. And your working title, which intrigues me, is Why We Must Remember: A Descendant's Reckoning with Her Enslaving Ancestors. So I know that you have not only this book, but now Why We Must Remember, or some form of it. You also have, as you shared, a lecture tonight in Birmingham as part of the Martin Luther
It's
King.
on Saturday.
I'm sorry, on Saturday, as part of the Birmingham celebration of the MLK weekend. So this is you doing your work and you pushing us to do our work, and we are, as I said earlier, deeply in your debt. Let me turn then to some other ways in which Water will be doing our work, which will begin on Tuesday the 20th, not too many days from now. It will be Let the Winter Go, Diane New and the water community looking at a time when there is more despair than hope, more struggle than community, when our spiritual roots are tested in this winter season in the Northern Hemisphere, when ice and snow remind that a thaw and greening are around the bend. So join us to say goodbye to winter, however, perhaps prematurely, and to welcome spring with great hope at that liturgy on Tuesday, the 20th of January at 7:30 p.m. Eastern Time. And then the next water meditation will be Monday, February 9th at 7:30 with Rosemary B. Ganley from Peterborough, Ontario, who always brings fresh ideas and insightful comments to share. She will explore the grace of endings, both politically and personally. So that will be at 7:30 p.m. on Monday, February the 9th. Our next Water Talk will be scheduled in February with a topic to be announced. So those are some of the ways that our programs, which are always free and open to everyone, are available to you. Donations to water are needed and welcome, but it is our view that if we socialize resources and those who can donate do so generously, we can always make water programs available to everyone without charge. And that has been the case for the last several decades. We believe at Water, if we share, among us there's enough. Operative phrase, if we share, among us there's enough. So thank you especially to Melanie Morrison for sharing so generously today. And now this order of the program is ended in full. Those who have to leave may do so. I hope many of you will stay around. I also want to acknowledge that we had a meditation earlier this week that Virginia Day, who's with us at this moment, did on buttons, the meaning of buttons. And if you want to look at something creative about the many ways in which buttons, mismatched, matching pairs and sets work, and how the buttons are a way to think about moving into the new year, I advise you to go to our website and look. It'll be up tomorrow, I hope, at the video of that, the nature of buttons. Thank you, Virginia Day. And I can see Paula and Bradley, who were with us, shaking their heads and affirming, Bernadette as well, affirming what that was on Monday night. Just a marvelous experience of looking at diversity. One more way in which we do our work. With that, I turn to Sid, and then the floor will be open again.
Thank you, Mary. I have a question which didn't come up, but it comes up for me all the time. And it's probably in your work, Melanie. But to you, I want to give you an example first. I've been in conversation with a native woman from California who lived in an area where there had been a rupture between the needs of the native communities and the community and the needs of the white community or the established town community, let's put it that way. And this had historic roots, and they determined together that what they needed to do was to work toward repair, that they needed. So I think they took a cycle of maybe 6 years. I don't quite remember this, but they had elements where they brought folks together throughout that period of time to find different ways to approach the notion of repairing this rift. At the end of their work together, when they determined together that it had been done, the native woman was telling me, and then of course we had our finals, our together, we as they had worked together but also separately in two separate groups throughout this time. She said we, the indigenous folks, had our ceremony. We had an extra day of ceremony and prayer around this. And I said, I have to ask you, what did the white community do? And she said, they didn't do that. And the reason I bring this up is because I think we are starved for ceremony and ritual. And that we as white women have been given a set of rituals that may or may not have meaning for us, and prayers that may or may not have meaning for us. But when we're in a situation like this, a ceremony will not heal a rift by itself, but it can be an enormous, I believe, change within the individuals who create the ceremony, who participate in the ceremony, and who let themselves be touched by this ceremony. In other words, that's one more little piece where we have undone part of the knot, is through our ceremonies and rituals. And I just want to know if this comes up, and I'm not necessarily talking about church ending in a prayer from the pulpit at the end of a meeting. I'm talking about people creating their own. What does it mean to me in this moment to confront my ancestors and how they related to the Native Americans in 1650? So yeah, so I'm just curious about your
Well,
response to that.
I would say amen. I mean, I would say yes. It's it is a very important part of, I mean, movements for racial justice throughout the decades have
Right.
been sustained by ritual, by prayer, by calling upon ancestors with gratitude on whose shoulders we stand. Music, song, the late brilliant um, founder of Sweet Honey in the Rock. The music of taking Black church tradition and creating Bernice Reagan Johnson,
Yes.
the new words for that and so forth. And I believe that I think some of that ritual making is surely going on with some of the people I know in Minneapolis, St. Paul right now in Minnesota. I can't lift it up for you. I can't say, but someone like Rebecca Volkel, I'm certain with others in that region are both developing rituals and songs and prayers and for sustenance, for the strength to carry on. And yes, after it, I mean, I feel we have to nurture spaces. We could call them ritual spaces that might be inviting for some and not for others, but spaces where people can bring their grief and rage, lament at the setbacks because they will continue to be many, but also nurture in those where in those spaces we can celebrate with music, song, other prayers of shouting, dancing, even the smallest victories with joyful exuberance. That needs to be part of what sustains us. Thank you.
Thanks, Sid. A great issue to bring up. I just had two things I wanted to talk about. One is I've been puzzling over this word ally for a long time. And somewhere in the back of my mind and tradition, John 14:26 or John 16:7, the notion that Jesus didn't leave an ally, but an advocate. And I wonder why people don't use especially the Christian tradition, don't use the term advocate. It struck me when you were talking about and defining ally, it had all the earmarks of an advocate. And I just wonder if it's time without in any way suggesting that especially white people take over the leadership, but that the advocacy role, not just standing there one arm as long as the other, but the doing part says more to me about advocate than ally. I just wonder if you have any thoughts about this.
I have many thoughts, Mary, and I will say that rightfully so. This is one of the questions that is often raised in the talks, in author events and book talks with me. Melanie, why did you choose ally and not accomplice?
Well, you use that. You
Yes, or co-conspirator. And I understand the question, and I have been deeply, even though I started an organization called Allies for Change. And I just want to point out this was not just about white ally, it was non-disabled ally, male allies, heterosexual, and so forth, people doing their own work in many realms. Um, but even though I did start an organization, I've been profoundly ambivalent about the term ally forever because it is not only I understand that um, that I have heard friends and colleagues of color say to me the word ally means you come and you go. You show up for a while and then you disappear. Um, and that is really, I, I will say to you, Mary, I chose the word ally for the book because I think it's the most recognizable. But I want to bring people into the work of trustworthiness, action, showing up, not checking out, not disappearing, so forth. Should I have called it something else? I mean, I know you're raising it not in terms of why that, Melanie, but I, I too, and I want to say this, Mary, because I think it's something I do try to address in the book is in my experience, I mean, the advocacy piece, the action piece is absolutely critical. But there's also, um, I have learned working not just with white people, but in racially diverse spaces, that there is an important shift that has to happen in those of us who are white. If we're going to move from being interested in, concerned about racism, to being passionately invested in the work of racial justice. And I think it's often, I think people initially come to, say, an anti-racism event or training or so forth out of solidarity with someone they love, maybe a family member who's been adopted or someone, I mean, I'm talking about white people now, might be a family member of color or a colleague or something. And that solidarity is absolutely essential. But there's another shift, I think, that has to happen when we discover that our lives, our souls, and our healing as a people also depend on the eradication of racism. Huh? And that racism is our history as well as the history of people of color. If we're just concerned about what people of color are experiencing, we may not get to the place of understanding. I mean, racism does not oppress us as people of color, but it's profoundly harmed us. And it has shaped us in all kinds of ways. So I think that's also the word ally doesn't by itself, we think of NATO allies and so forth, doesn't bring that to mind. But I guess I'm trying to infuse the word with a whole host of meanings. Yeah?
great. And as I say, far be it for me to be critical of your choice of words in the
Oh no,
title.
that's okay. It's a good critique.
Okay. What is it that we might be, what is
Yeah,
it we moving toward
yeah.
as well? Um, go ahead. Is it Arlene or Stephanie? I know there's two names
Looks
up.
like Stephanie to me, is it?
Okay. Um,
Yes. Arlene had to step away, but yeah, Melanie, it's lovely to see you again after I don't know how many decades.
It
I
has
hope
been
it's not
a
quite that
long
long,
time.
but
Hi,
um,
Stephanie.
I'm was so happy Arlene discovered your book and I now have it and it's really close to my heart. I'll just say two quick things for a background. One is my training academically and professionally is as a cultural anthropologist. And so cultural humility is at the heart of cultural anthropology. And so that has been what I hoped has been my posture toward the world as long as I can remember. But also about as long as I can remember, I have been aware that both sides of my family, one side of my family for sure I've known since I was a child, have enslaving ancestors. And there's a branch of my family that still lives in the plantation home in South Carolina.
Mm,
And on my mother's side, we have been more recently, maybe a couple of decades, aware of some really profound um, history in Tennessee of
yeah.
enslaving ancestors as well. And, as I have been, I recently retired, and one of my goals is to delve into this history and understanding ancestors. And, as I've been contemplating this over many decades, I've really become very aware of what you call soul splitting. And, there's so little written about it that I have found. I mean, I just think it has to be one of the most profound things that shaped our society and white supremacy.
Yes.
And I just was wondering if you know of any resources or people. I know of one um, African American woman who has really works from this premise in her work of advocacy and healing within African American communities as a social worker. And I attended a 4 or 5 day training of hers about a decade ago, and that even brought up more strong questions about this. How can we, as white people, understand, investigate, learn, contribute to the understanding of this process? Because I really do feel as though, um, both as individuals, within our own families, within our communities, and as a society, that we really need to understand better and acknowledge this and figure out what can we do to help
Yes. Yes.
counter heal it. Thanks.
Uh, are you familiar with the work of the folks who created the film Traces of the Trade?
No.
That would be something I would highly recommend. And if I could, I would call her name right now. She is an Episcopal priest who learned, I think, when she was in seminary at a family reunion a good many years ago now, that yeah, an aunt or someone just dropped the news that her northern ancestors in Providence, Rhode Island, were the largest slave trading people in the history of the United States. Now, I don't know whether that relative was bragging about that, but just sent shock waves through this woman who I can't call her name, but Traces of the Trade. And that family, I mean, that's a film really worth watching if you are doing some of your work as a descendant. There are many, I think there's Stephanie could either private message me or go to my website,
Yeah,
contact me through
happy to do that.
we could talk more about some other things I would recommend.
I would love that.
Thank you for the work you're doing and going to do. Huh? Yes, thanks.
Thank you.
No,
I'll be in touch.
the person,
Okay.
Melanie,
Frances. Frances is up there with her hand up.
Melanie, are you hearing me that I'm suggesting it's Melanie, Katrina Brown?
Oh, Katrina Brown, thank you.
Yeah. And the other
Yes.
thing that occurred to me in response to that is you had a wonderful section in your book about the question of cemeteries on land belonging to families and how property that your described property owned by those who were enslaving had buried their own on their property, but had no marked graves for those blacks who were enslaved there. And I'm thinking of the documentary that Mackie Alston did, Acts of Reparation.
Yes,
Do you recommend that?
I do. I
Yeah,
do. Indeed.
that's another. We'll put those in the notes. Okay, we'll put
Good.
both in the notes. Yes,
Good.
go
Hi.
Hi.
It's very exciting to be a part of this conversation, Melanie. And thank you for this work. I'm looking forward to reading the book. And I had a comment about ally, the word ally. And it's actually a question because we use that word here. I'm in Oberlin. I'm at a retirement community in regards to work with LGBTQ
Yes.
plus and allies. And I think I don't know about the book because I haven't read it, but I think it is an entry word into the work. And if you put other words there, people who have not crossed the line, they don't cross it. And then once they're in there, they can decide. But then it becomes a choice, which I think we have to choose to continue the work. And what I heard from the talk today is it also seems that there's quite a bit in this book that will move us that have been on the path, to move further and also to refresh us, because I think you get very tired as you are investigating how to repair. So my question, that's one question. My question about
May I just want to thank you I want to flag and thank you for that entry word, indeed. Yes, but which means we need to go deeper than that. But it is a word that perhaps will invite.
And there's levels. I think it sounds like in your book there are levels of choice, like what we offer people, so that you are not overwhelmed when, especially, well, I think all the way with this society, you're always having to deal with overwhelm of what needs to be repaired and where you need support, where you need to support other people. The question I have about the book, particularly because it might be useful here, is it a focus on people of faith mostly, and B, is it a book that if you are just coming into the work, because you've used the word ally, that it would be useful to people who are beginning to open up? And then I want to just close.
Yes, thank you for those two clarifying. It is not a book that is for people of any particular faith tradition. I do speak about, like I was quoting when I talked about how white spectatorship, white supremacy has weakened the emotional, psychological, and spiritual lives of people of color. I use words like that. This work for me also has a faith connection. And I mean, but I know that many that people come from all kinds of different faith traditions, or whatever is calling them, prompting them, to move, to step out and move further. That to me is also spiritual as well as political work, but I don't lay that on people. Do you know what I mean? I'm not trying to convince people it's spiritual. If that makes sense, if they want to just say with a lot of words, that distinction. Now, the second part, would you say again? You had two parts, the faith-based.
And would it be a book people that, I mean, you use the word ally, so do you see this book as people entering into becoming trustworthy?
Yeah, I hope so. I hope so. I made a very purposeful, I do kind of scholarly work in my life, but I am committed to making things as accessible in readership as possible. And I'm really pretty story-based in my writing. I mean, there is one of the pieces early on is about my experience of being taken by my mother and a man who was chaplain, a white man, Everett McNair chaplain in the late 50s and 60s at Talladega College in HBCU, huh? They took me to the March on Washington when I was 14 years old. And I tell about that experience through my memories as a 14-year-old of that experience. Okay. I I'm not sure that was a good response to your question, but I'm saying there are story-based things that I think are accessible to whatever people might bring by way of experience. I hope that they'll resonate with some of the experiences and the questions I'm wrestling with. And yeah, I hope it would be accessible. Maybe you can let me know what you think.
Yeah, I make a commitment to read it
After you've read it.
and let you
Okay.
know. Yeah, that's my work. Yeah.
Great. Thank you, Anne, and thank you, Melanie. And as a recent reader of actually my second read through it, the answer is yes, but you'll have to decide for yourself. So
Thank you.
the last question here, and then we have really presumed on your time, Melanie, and I don't want to do more of that. So let's go ahead, Sandy, and then we'll close up. And this is a topic, obviously, of enormous interest for people and of singular importance. So we will be revisiting this, particularly as you promise yet another work coming out. So go ahead, Sandy.
Thank you. Melanie, it's been 15 years since we came up to Michigan to do our own work, and it's wonderful to see you again. Lisa sends her greetings and her love.
Oh, wonderful to see you, Sandy.
Thank you. In Cleveland, there's an organization called Getting to We, W-E, that was founded by a psychologist named Deborah Plummer. She's an African-American woman.
I think I mean, I know of her, but not.
Yeah. And the particular, my understanding is her particular interest is to promote conversation between Black and white women across issues of difference. And in particular, the concern that's been addressed a lot is the anger among many Black women that white women did not show up for the election in November. And so we met for conversation about that and other issues. And so we were in small groups to talk about certain questions that were given, maybe 8 in a group. And an African-American woman was the leader in our group. And she said, I'm going to start out and I want to talk about, as we meet one another, on whose back do you come? You know, who has carried you here today? And she told the story of her grandmother and other aunties and other women that were and that really brought her and what brings her to this table. And I said that I come here and I named my grandmother and my mother, who were dear to me and really engaged me in thinking about this work. And I said, and I will also say that I come here on the back of ancestors who were slave owners. That I learned by doing some research that I saw the will of one of my Virginia ancestors who bequeathed his Negro to so-and-so. And I said, that's a part of my history that I have to claim in this space, and do my work.
Yeah.
And she looked at me and she said, you are the first person that has ever said that in one of these meetings. And then a couple other women kind of went, yeah. And so I'm not saying that and it was like, I wondered, is this the time and the place to say this?
I can imagine.
Or not? and how is it said and how is it dealt with? And it certainly shifted some of the storytelling, but it's, to me, it's germane. It's the story that I come in with, that I learned on ancestry.com, not any other way.
Sandy, I have experienced something somewhat similar that I will, when invited in a workshop or anti-racism seminar, or to name someone who's inspired my passion for racial justice, I certainly name Truman Morrison, my father, and Eleanor Morrison, what they modeled for me throughout their lifetime. And but I used to only name them, huh? But I'm also naming some of the ancestors who created intergenerational wounds and havoc and wreaked evil by auctioning 5-year-olds and so forth on the auction block. So I don't go into great detail about that, but I do say, as you'd acknowledge, this too is my history, and I have become absolutely convinced. And when I first learned that I was a descendant of enslavers, and the first time I ever went to Montevallo, I'm just like, what? Why do I feel driven to come here? I have, in terms of great, 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 grandparents, I have 16, 20 sets of them. Why am I here in Montevallo? And yet, I knew it matters. It matters that I am a descendant. And I don't think it, yeah, it matters in terms of, and the question, as I shared earlier, about it's, what does this require of me? And that doesn't come out of guilt, but it does come out of a sense of responsibility for knowing now what I know and working with those. For example, in the truth telling about this history and preserving that history under duress. So thank you, Sandy, for what
Thank
you've.
you.
Yes,
Thank you, Melanie.
I'm led to think about how, and this is from your book directly, as you discuss your father's family, Melanie, how one who does what you're doing and what Sandy's doing can expect pushback within one's own family, that these are delicate matters not to be discussed in public, blaming the same people from whom you received your own privilege. I'm sure that hints for negotiating that kind of dynamic will be something that will be very useful as time goes on, because that's yet another piece of it. In other words, not just for oneself, but also living in a family constellation. There's,
Oh, yes. Oh, yes.
if it was your same grandmother, or your same great great grandmother or great great grandfather, boy, that's a lot.
Yes.
For complicated Thanksgivings, huh?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
With great gratitude and with enormous enormous thanks for your courage and your strength to resist. I'm wishing all of us, as we finish off today, this kind of moral clarity that we're trying to develop, and also wishing us a break from the bad news with periodic bursts of beauty in our path, so that we can continue to do this very hard work. And it's those periodic bursts of beauty that I think, at least, very helpful. So thank you all. Thank you, especially Melanie, and we'll get notes and information out to people, along with several of the comments that people made. And if you have other resources that you'd like us to share, anyone, please send them along. We'll put them in the note. Thank you, and good day from Water.
Thank you. Thanks so much to Water.
You're more
Thank
than
you for being here, all of you.